I know you've got an ear out for the start of the podcast, but before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to remind you to keep an eye out for Darrell Lee's limited edition Christmas treats, because they're in stores now. Like the iconic Christmas nougat pudding, so yummy and a gorgeous little gift. And some delicious Chrissy-themed twists on your favourite treats, like the Darrell Lee Rockley Road with chewy red and green jelly pieces, green and red crunchy milk chocolate balls, my favourites, and green apple and strawberry flavoured licorice. Watch them disappear. Your Christmas treats table will pop with colour and scrumptiousness. Spread some joy, bring the fun, and enjoy the Christmas tradition that is Darrell Lee. Hurry before they sell out. Darrell Lee makes Christmas better. This is The 5 of My Life with me, Nigel Marsh. The series where I talk to notable people about 5 of their defining things. The way it works is my guests always choose a favourite film, book, song, place and possession. They tell me their choices in advance so I can research them, but they don't tell me why they've chosen them. That's the subject of our conversation. The reason I devised this series is I wanted to create a slightly different way to gain an insight into the real lives and thoughts of prominent people. Remo Giuffre is a creative strategist with a long record as an entrepreneur, retail merchant and brand builder. He founded the iconic Remo General Store in 1988 and the General Thinking Network in 2001. In 2009, he took on the license for TEDx Sydney, immediately turning it into the gold standard for 10x events globally. Bursting with ideas and optimism, he's rarely discouraged and certainly never idle. As part of my preparation for this conversation, which I have been enormously looking forward to, I reread your fabulous book, and there's a quote from it that I want to read out. "Storytelling is paramount, and sometimes we can use things to connect us to what really matters, and that's the people who are associated with those things." Now that is what this whole show is about. That could be the summation of what I'm trying to do with 5 of My Life. So
where's my clip?
Yeah. So I am doubly thrilled that you are on this show because you get it.
Yeah.
And on the subject of stories, before we get to your choices and stories, I'd like to ask you what's been your favourite 5 of My Life story so far?
I really enjoyed Kate McClymont's story. I know her, not well. I've met her a few times, but I just found it very frank, very honest, interesting. I didn't know all of those tragic things about her family, but also just her describing her craft and how it, and the ins and outs of it, and the encrypted conversations and the meetings behind stables. I was enthralled by the whole thing, actually. So.
Yeah, she's a fascinating woman. I love that conversation. But we're here to talk about you and your choices, and we start traditionally with the film. And you have chosen the first film ever in human history to win a Best Picture Oscar as a sequel. You've chosen Godfather Part 2, 1974. Tell us about that, mate.
I was very reluctant to actually put that one down. It's such a cliche, but for an Italo-Australian boy to put The Godfather Part 2, but it went beyond the ethnic affinity. The figure of the Don Corleone, born of the Godfather original movie, and then the whole backstory, early 1900s New York City, It just reminded me so much of my father, who was not an organised criminal, by the way, but his spirit was very similar, very paternal, successful immigrant here in Australia with many hundreds of employees working in factories from all nationalities. The shiny suit, the squeeze of the fruit as you walk past the fruit stand, the knowing everybody's name, their children. That sort of, Don Corleone meets Oscar Schindler. That was my father.
Now you mentioned the ethnic similarity, but for people who don't know, could you describe your family's origins?
I'm full-blood Italian. Dad was born in Sicily, in 1912, came out here as a very young man in his teens on his own. In those days, when I think it was they were providing malvasia for the Spanish army or something, and then when that crop failed in the islands, they had nothing except capers to live on. So anyone with any ambition ended up moving to the New World, whether that would be the United States or Canada or Australia. And my father's brother went to Boston. Dad came to Sydney. I think he was 14. He had a distant relative here working in the fruit markets, and I think that was his first job. But he, so that's Dad's side, from a tiny little island off the coast of Sicily, as part of the Aeolian Islands. And Mum was born here in Sydney of Italian parents, one from Naples and the other one from actually the same island that Dad was from. So full blood Wog boy growing up in Sydney's eastern suburbs, but that was my history.
And he became quite a successful businessman.
Yeah, he was that classic industrial entrepreneur. He started in the flower market, fruit markets, then the flower markets. Then he bought his own florist, and then it was 2 florists and 3 florists and 4 a chain of 4 in King's Cross and Elizabeth Bay and Paddington, all around there. And then that kind of segued into a business manufacturing transparent celluloid boxes for the presentation of flowers. And, the family legend propagated by him was that he was in a movie, an American movie, and some bellboy delivered these flowers to somebody in one of these boxes, and he thought that's a great idea, and he kind of ran out of the theatre without skipping a beat. So then he got into manufacturing, and one different kind of factory after the other, metal stamping. In Camperdown, it was the Popolare Metal Stamping Company. It was the Popular Metal Stamping Company, and they made cosmetic packaging for all of the big cosmetic brands, Elena Rubinstein, who he knew, and met all of those people. So, and then during the war, the production changed from lipstick containers to bullets.
Right.
And meanwhile, the guy who did well early in his life was able to help a lot of other people, and he became the go-to man for Italian immigrants coming here.
Right.
Often their first job would be at Popolare or one of his factories. They used to call it Popolare the iron lung because it was the life support system for an Italian immigrant coming to Australia.
Wow.
Their first job before going somewhere else. And then he formalised that philanthropic work in the 50s by founding something called the Italo-Australian Welfare Centre, which then morphed into a Commonwealth government-funded organisation called COASIT. And so he was the founding president of COASIT, which still exists today. And there in Leichhardt, there's the G.A. Giuffre boardroom to celebrate his founding of that. So along the way, he was recognised by the Italian government a bunch of times.
Wow.
As a commendatore, and then a grande ufficiale, and then by the Australian government. So he lived a very rich and generous life.
And as I'm looking at the man in front of me now, are you a 50-50 combination of the traits of your mum and dad, or did you get most of them from your mum or most of them from your dad? And explain which ones you think you got from which.
Yeah, probably 50-50. Mum is a warrior, or was a warrior, more of a warrior,
worry, not warrior. So it's like,
not a sort of
a sword carrying warrior. She worries.
Sure. So I probably get my physical cowardice and from my physical cowardice and anxiety from her.
So you're not very good in a street fight?
No, I'd be running the other way, I think. No, I think I have courage. on some levels, but I do arduous, but I don't do perilous.
Okay. And so that the worry side from your mum and from your dad.
Well, I guess the entrepreneurial, make your own path, do your own thing, do what's right, but be certain about that. Also, he was the designer as well as the owner, and so he designed the aluminium furniture that then went into production in his factory. So, and I grew up seeing him at the kitchen table with scraps of paper and napkins, designing chairs and one thing or another. Untrained, formerly untrained, but he was very good at imagining those things and then manifesting them in his factory.
Well, this is a very good link to the second choice on Five of My Life. For your book, you've chosen Ayn Rand's 1943 classic, The Fountainhead. Tell us about the book and your story behind it.
I was unaware, once again, very kind of cliched and un-PC choice, but...
Now, why do you say that, by the way?
Well, it is... It's been a long time since I read it, to be honest with you. But it is pretty alt-right kind of...
I'm not so sure.
Really?
Yeah. I've read lots of her work and that Shrugged and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I think she's very easily misunderstood.
Yeah.
So I was glad you chose the book because I
remember that when I read it, I was living in New York. I was 24. I was doing my MBA.
Right.
And a friend of mine who was doing an MBA there at the same time was reading it at the same time. So we were sort of...
It's a life-changing book for many people.
Yeah, it was... I don't know if the listeners are aware of the storyline, but it's basically, an architect who forges his own path and is certain of his own work and believes in that good work is its own reward and that it's not necessarily about what other people think of it.
He's not big on compromise, is he?
So I remember feeling invigorated by that at the time, and feeling that I too, I guess it solidified my self-belief,
right?
And gave me, confidence, extra confidence. I mean, I was already fairly confident.
It's interesting. I mean, she went slightly nutty at the end of her days, but she said, "I am not primarily an advocate for capitalism, but of reason." And her major influence was Aristotle. Right. So it's easy now, looking back in a woke eastern suburbs way, to go, "Ooh, she was a fascist." No, she hated fascism. Yeah. So that book is an incredible book. Yeah. But I need to hear, how the hell did you get yourself to New York? Look at you in Manhattan doing your MBA. It sounds fabulous.
I studied commerce and law, and I worked as a lawyer for a split second.
Living on the island, on Manhattan?
No, here in Sydney with Baker and McKenzie, who were still, probably the world's biggest law firm. I enjoyed that intellectual challenge of that, and I actually enjoyed the people that I was working with, but I didn't enjoy the work that I was doing.
Sure.
And I actually knew that it wasn't going to retain me for that long. And then I just saw the MBA as a way to disrupt that and expose me to more opportunities and more. And I was fortunate that my family was able to support that ambition. Right. I mean, it's not the financial commitment that it is these days, but even then, it was something. And so I left Baker & McKenzie after a year and went to Columbia Business School and lived, initially on the Upper West Side and
Fabulous.
in a sort of a big shared house thing called the International House. Then I went over the wall and moved into a share house in the East Village with a Norwegian drummer and a Danish dancer. And we lived above a restaurant called the Dumpling House on the corner of 11th Street and 2nd Avenue, which then became David Chang's first Momofuku dumpling house, which is still there today. But it was a pretty rough neighbourhood in those, so it was 1985.
Right.
84, 85. I do remember on more than one occasion hearing gunshots in the street, and but it was an exciting time to be living in New York. I have to say, there was the 80s. It was nightclubs and the Palladium and Keith Haring and Aria and all of that stuff.
Up there
Andy
with the
Warhol.
happiest times in your life?
It was. I wouldn't characterize them as the happiest, but there's certainly a lightness of being that you have when you are that age. You've kind of done your study, or you're in the process of completing your study. You don't yet have a whole bunch of commitments. You're living in a place where nobody really knows you, and you can kind of finesse your own persona and brand as much as you would like to. It just feels kind of special, unique, not to be repeated phase of your life.
It's a time where you can take opportunities. There are later on in your life, many opportunities may present themselves in a whole host of different realms of our existence, and you go, well, that's not me. I'm 60-year-old and blah blah blah, and I've got certain roles and responsibilities. But if you're living it up in East Village in New York, God, well, I'm retrospectively jealous of you, mate. It sounds
it was a really great experience.
Your third choice. It's the song on Five of My Life. There's a Spotify playlist where all of the guests' choices are on, and I'm thrilled to be adding yours, mate, because you've chosen a song from a soundtrack. It's Robert Altman's 1980 Robin Williams' Popeye film. Not the best film in the world, one could suggest, but I'm not here to pass judgment. You've chose the Shelley Duvall, a wonderful song, He Needs Me, written by Harry Nilsson, the American Beatle. And there's a fabulous story behind that, mate. Will you tell us about why you chose that song?
I can't remember how we ended up with the cassette tape of it. It could have been Melanie's ex-boyfriend, Ricky Fattar, who was the drummer from the Beach Boys, actually.
Melanie went out with the drummer from the Beach Boys. Now that is a dinner party classic. You win it right there. That's the mic drop.
No, anyway, I'm guessing that's maybe where it came from. But because Ricky was friends with Robin Williams. But I met Melanie soon after I returned from New York in 1987, and became quickly smitten with her, more smitten with her than she was with me, and more or less spent 3 or 4 years trying to sort of talk her around. And the day that things started to change significantly for us, we were in the car together playing that cassette tape on the way to a birthday party on the in Whale Beach or Palm Beach. I think it was a recently deceased, sadly, Martin Armiger's birthday. And Melanie had called me that morning to see if I would accompany her. I was living in a flat in Bondi on the beach. And I didn't say yes straight away, which completely confused her. Later on, I think she figured out that I had someone else with me when she called.
Right.
So, that was a bonus point for me as well. But it was a foggy day. We were crossing the Sydney Harbour Bridge. The music was playing, and there was just this kind of feeling of euphoria for some reason, that was welling in the car. I could start to see her defences dropping after so many years. And it was a wonderful day, and that music was kind of, galvanized to that moment, and so has become kind of a very fond memory for me.
That's a beautiful story. Would you mind telling us about the fax machine story? I was howling with laughter.
Right. Well, as a way to illustrate the sort of disinterest, the deep disinterest that Melanie had for me at one point, as I was travelling quite a lot for my Remo general store at the time and doing buying trips, and it was the days of faxing, and I had a little portable fax machine that looked like a tissue dispenser, actually. And I would document what I was doing, who I was meeting, my fascinating trip, and send the faxes to her. She was running a super successful photographer's agency on Victoria Street in Potts Point. And as I have been told, the fax machine would come to life. She would see it was from me. She would turn the fax machine around 90 degrees so that the fax paper would go immediately into the rubbish bin. So it's a fairly brutal image.
The passion and persistence that you showed in convincing that lovely lady to hook up with you is apparent in the passion and persistence with which you have been a leading light for TED. And I'd love you to tell us about that, because that's an incredibly interesting journey. It's 91 you started?
No, 91 was a heyday year for the Remo General Store, and we had a big catalogue that won all sorts of awards and ended up on the desk of the founder of TED in New York, unbeknownst to me. And he once again the fax machine sent me a fax saying, just saw a copy of your catalogue. It's wonderful. It reminds me of the Whole Earth catalogue. I organise this annual event. I'd love to invite you as my guest on the condition that you can bring 800 of those catalogues with you to give to the attendees. And never heard of it, did a bit of research, sounded interesting, and attended. The next one was going to be in 1993 in Kobe, Japan, which was kind of weird because they were always in Monterey in the US, but he tried doing one offshore, and that was the first one I attended. And, I immediately became bewitched by this incredible event that, with the most fascinating group of attendees you could imagine, and the randomness of the topics, the Buddhist monk followed by an opera singer, followed by a brain scientist, followed by Bill Gates, and you never knew who you were going to be standing next to at the urinal. And so I went the following year. He asked me to do the T-shirts for the speakers, and then the year after that, he asked me to do the T-shirts for everybody. And so there was lots of horse trading in those days. He was a mercurial guy. Richard Saul Werman was his name. He used to be Frank Gehry's partner, and he was known. He was best known for his. He had this series of travel guides called the Access Guides that he was the first guy to organise information by neighbourhood and not function. So the chapter had a neighbourhood, and there was the museum stream and then the shopping stream, and it was kind of a clever thing. Then he wrote a seminal book called Information Anxiety, and he's written many, many books since then. So I was a quote-unquote TEDster for a long time. And in the years where I wasn't going broke here in Sydney, I tried to get to California to meet who were now my friends that I was seeing kind of once a year and checking in on. And then, cut to the 2000s, and then they developed this licensing program called TEDx, and they needed a safe pair of hands in Australia. They knew me well, and they actually approached me and asked me if I would do it. I was running a rebooted Remo general store as an online business from a very small, hole in a wall location on. It could have been the one on shopfront on Bondi Road or a warehouse in Surrey Hills. I forget, but I talked it over with Melanie. I was about to turn 50. I had developed a expertise and a profile as a kind of the t-shirt guy and the coffee beans guy and the things person, and I was always interested in more than that. And this seemed to be like a good way to reposition the things guy as the ideas guy. So, I took it on, and it just picked up a lot of momentum very quickly because of the depth of my legacy network, born of all of the work I'd done over many decades with the Remo business.
You do a fabulous job with it. Sydney's regarded as, I don't want to embarrass you, but one of the very best in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, it's we've turned it into something that it wasn't necessarily intended to be, which is generally much more grassrootsy and low key. But the people that I involved as collaborators early on were all at the top of their game, and were all kind of interested in pushing it as hard and as high as it could be. You're too shy to admit that you were in the very first group of speakers.
I remember that conversation. I'd never heard of Ted, and when you asked me, sort of whatever. And then when I investigated, do you remember I called you back and said, I can't do it. You've got the wrong Nigel, because these people I'm looking at in America, they're seriously good. But, no, I've got very fond memories of that, mate. I'm very grateful that you sort of got me into the TED world. I want to circle back because there's a really interesting story buried away in you just casually saying, "Oh, this bloke in America, catalogue landed in his desk." That's because the Remo store. I wish I'd come to Australia earlier, because I don't get it. I haven't got that cultural heritage of having grown up with it. I meet people who go on about the store it was Oxford Street, wasn't it? They go on that I can't understand because I wasn't here then. I mean, I know you, love the Remo brand, blah, 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 but I didn't understand. The people tell me every single week, every Christmas, it was just this icon, such an icon, that someone in America is getting a catalogue. To tell us a bit about the Remo store story for people who might not know.
When I returned from America, I had all of these degrees, the commerce degree, law degree, MBA. The corporate world is your oyster. But because I was so my own person, I just couldn't. I did get a real job for a little while as the head of business development for some media company.
Is it soul crushing?
It was soul crushing, and it was kind of like I just couldn't understand the relationship between my effort and the end user, the punter.
Because there probably wasn't one, mate.
Because there probably wasn't one. But so I really wanted to simplify that, and I wanted to cut out all of the steps, and I wanted to be able to do something that I could then serve someone with a cup of coffee. I don't know, sell them a T-shirt. So I ended up taking over the lease on this five and dime, Greek gift shop on the corner of Crown and Oxford Street, which had been there for a long time. And I thought my mother's reaction was, "Darling, you've got 3 degrees and you're opening a shop. Please help me understand."
We sent you to New York, you bastard.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly the immigrant's dream for the next generation professional son. But for me, it was semi-desperate. It was like, okay, I choose to live a life of passion. I don't, care if that's a small life of passion, but I choose to live a life of passion. Hopefully, there will be enough people who will resonate with the things that I will curate from both here and elsewhere and develop, that I will be able to, eke out a self-employed existence. But it was just a phenomenon from day one. Even before it opened, people were talking about it and running news stories on it, and it just literally had, a big black window with the one word, Remo opening soon, and that was kind of enough to. And it was an interesting time in Darlinghurst too. There was a lot of creative energy. The old Sergeant's Pie building was full of squatting designers and artists. Mark Newson, jewelers, every sculptors, every hat makers, lots of creative energy. And so apart from anything else, apart from bringing in manufactured items and telling their stories, it also served to be a platform for that creative community. They would do their art, make their art, but they would also make something that could be sold. So I was like the real world Etsy, if you like.
Yeah.
So we had a department that was the real world Etsy and sold all manner of manifestations of contemporary design energy from that corner of Darlinghurst. And we were blessed with a 5-meter window, which very soon after we opened, we realized could be, our cheapest form of advertising. So we paid a signwriter to change that every 2 weeks to something very bold and very, striking. And so those windows became very well known in Sydney as a sort of a pulse of what was happening. Didn't always try to sell stuff. It celebrated things. The Mardi Gras, whatever it was. When a homeless guy called Barrow Man died in a very sort of anonymous way, I was sitting at a dinner with an artist called Richard Goodwin who told me the Barrow Man story, who sketched a silhouette of Barrow Man. I recognised that because I'd seen this guy pushing a barrow with a helmet on, with his like dark face buried deep, as he walked along. Richard turned out to be the only person at this guy's funeral. Nobody knew him. So we decided there and then at that dinner that we would celebrate Barrow Man in the window. So Richard gave me the sketch. I gave it to the signwriter. We did a huge, Barrow Man on a back streetscape, and just a sort of a dedication to him with his real name in the corner. And the outpouring of love that we got from the community was great. And that barrow, I think, went to the Powerhouse collection. And so it was as much about a contribution to the culture as it was about selling.
Yeah, this is exactly. So hearing about it, not understanding about it, you think it's a shop. It's not a shop. In some ways, it's analogous to the role that your dad had, but in a different sphere. You were the centre of something.
Yes,
yeah. A wonderful story and a huge credit to you.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun, and it fell on hard times financially for all the wrong reasons. Actually, it was all about the administrative back end and how things were, the systems or the lack thereof. The demand was galloping forward. Ironically, at the growing, when it went broke in 1995, like on the day my daughter was born.
Right.
I know, it's a whole other story. It was, almost selling $5 million worth of stuff out of a single shop with a little mail order business. It's kind of unheard of numbers, even by today's standards.
Would it be fair to suggest that you might not be as interested and excited by the back-end admin than the ideas, Remo? Or would that be an unfair slur?
I was all yin and no yang. Yeah. No, if anyone needed a chief operating officer or a financial controlling partner, it was me. But I was also a bit of a control freak, so for me to share power was difficult. But hard lessons got learnt, and I wouldn't go there again.
Your fourth choice is place. And I know you were in a dilemma. You were back and forth on the email. Do I choose this? Do I choose that? I am so glad that you came down to the 112 population, access only by boat. Tell me about Milson's Passage.
this is a little community on the Lower Hawkesbury River, 1 hour north of Sydney. Like 1 hour north of Sydney, but 1,000 years north of Sydney, 1,000 years ago. Because the runner-up was Bondi, as you know, because
which you didn't choose, so we're not going to talk about it.
We're not going to talk about it.
I know you love Bondi. Tell me about Milson's Passage.
A circuit breaker, I needed a circuit breaker in the intensity of life. I needed somewhere to represent and which could be about rest and reflection and reading and remoteness, which was not about intensity and social and network and, everything that the city is about. And, 2016, my mother died. There were some, other stresses going on in my life. At the time, there was, a health episode which turned out to be nothing, but it just kind of just gave me pause to reflect. I remember sitting in a cafe Bondi, and I drew up a typical week for my future life, and it involved being in Bondi for 4 nights a week and being at another place for 3 nights of the week, which was called Shack.
Right.
And it was an abstraction. It was just called Shack, and it was about rest and remote and reflection. And given that I'm a kind of a waterman, it was always going to need to be near the water. Anyway, I showed Melanie this plan. She liked the plan, but she doesn't do abstract. So immediately she was like, okay, water, close enough to Sydney. You don't like to drive on public transport. We basically, by process of elimination, we came up with kind of that part of the Lower Hawkesbury River, which is quite close to the bridge that heads to Newcastle there. So just to the left of that, there are a handful of river communities to which you can only get to by boat. We needed to get boat license. Anyway, we connected with a real estate agent who was very, very nice and took us around in a boat to visit a whole bunch of places. And we were downsizing in Bondi, as it happens at the time, and we just managed somehow to figure it out financially that we could do this, and we did it. And we bought a little shack. We call it a shack. It's a house. It's a 2-bedroom house, but it's like a 40s looking thing.
Rustic.
On a huge block of land, backing onto the national park with river in front and with a bunch of neighbours. I think there's 45 homes in the community. Every home has its own jetty. Every jetty has its own boat that gets the owner from the marina to the house. It's like a country town.
But this is...
It's Schitt's Creek. It's Sydney's Schitt's Creek.
But we're talking no shop, no post office, no nothing. It is remote. I mean, properly isolated.
Proper remote. There is the riverboat postman is a boat that takes tourists up and down the river. It drops off and collects the mail every day.
So I could send you a letter at Milson's Passage.
Oh yeah.
Wow,
stuff
okay.
arrives there. I mean, go to the mail shed and someone, Ron's ordered another box of wine. That's interesting.
And have you found that you have spent more time there than you imagined in that cafe in Bondi, or was your 4-3 split?
Initially,
accurate?
it was about right, but with COVID,
right,
we've skewed it way there. So now it's probably 5 there and 2 here. I love the balance. Melanie is more in love with the river than, she may be less reliant on the daily dose of Bondi that I get when I come back for a couple of days and do some laps in the pool. She would happily just camp out there and
right in Milson's Passage.
Yeah.
I wonder. I mean, this is a very weird question to ask. You guys are so fabulous, but are you a nightmare to live with?
We spend a lot of time together.
Answer the question. I didn't say how much time did you spend together. I said, are you a nightmare to live with?
Well, no, we're not a nightmare to live with. We're very relaxed parents, but we both have fairly strong aesthetic opinions.
Right.
Where the picture goes, what shade of pink the house should be, what gauge of copper for the outdoor shower, and we will eventually compromise, but no one's going to roll over for anyone else all that easily.
This is the perfect link to the fifth choice on Five My Life, because you have said in another forum, everything we own retains a meaning for one or both of us. And the fifth choice on Five My Life is a possession. So I imagine it was a nightmare because you'd have like 1,000 things that you potentially could have chosen. But you've chosen a silver napkin ring. Tell me about that.
One of my father's work associates was this Cockney self-made man, millionaire guy called Len Matchin. He oversaw a conglomerate of companies called the Cope Allman Group, and it acquired one of my father's businesses and renamed it as Cope Allman Australasia, and appointed my father to be chairman of that. And so Dad, having worked for himself his whole life, all of a sudden was part of this kind of global group based in London. Len and I had met him a bunch of times on his business trips to Sydney. He was a larger-than-life Cockney kind of character, as you can imagine. When we went, visited London as a family when I was in I can't remember, early teens or younger, his chauffeur picked us up in the roller, took us to a restaurant, served us the roll mops. It was the whole shebang. Flashy, Arthur Daly come good kind of guy. But he, as a tax haven thing, he bought this island in the Channel Islands called Brecku and lived on it as the king. So when I was doing my 19-year-old, in between university years trip to Europe, I decided to go visit him and his partner, who had been his secretary, Sue, on Brecku. And I was once again picked up by helicopter in Jersey, taken to the island, and spent 3 or 4 days there.
With the king?
With the king, and, spending like many, many hours of each of those days being tested by the king. I was a fairly confident 19-year-old, but he was really pressuring me for my motivations, and he was angry with me some days and then not angry, and then he would reminisce about my father and burst into tears. And I mean, he'd be drinking Tio Pepe sherry and champagne for most of the day. Even sitting in the hot sauna, I could just imagine he was going to keel over. Anyway, we got on well, had a wonderful, incredibly formative in some weird way time with him. And then 2 years later, this package arrived from him, and I opened it, and it was for my 21st birthday party and it was a silver napkin ring, all stamped with, his personal coat of arms and the stamp of the island, etc., and so forth. And it had my name engraved in all capital letters, REMO,
right,
on the napkin ring, and it was very powerful thing at some subconscious level. I think not immediately, but I think seeing my name like that was the first time the penny started to drop that maybe this name could represent something other than me, myself.
Yeah, because that's how your brand is. It's just your first name in capitals, not your last name.
Yeah.
And then that becomes the brand that you so successfully built.
So I think it was perhaps unconsciously on their part, they planted a seed that would not sprout for another 7 years. But I think I can kind of trace it back to that moment when I first thought of myself as potentially.
What a fascinating story. And then you've got to live this life, which I'd like to ask you about, where how, if at all, do you manage that dichotomy of Remo, the nice chap I'm looking at, and Remo, the brand that does all these amazing things, general thinker, TED. I mean, you're. I've got a quote here about you, which I absolutely love. Remo, and I don't know whether they're talking about Remo you or Remo the brand, but Remo is a bit famous, a familiar name in the right circles and for the right reasons, which I think is just sensational. You are so well known and so well loved amongst certain
just a
people.
bit.
Yeah. Well, no, I actually think it's in certain circles. You are Lady Gaga meets Madonna meets Mahatma Gandhi, and in other circles they go who? but so how do you manage the I'm Remo? I mean, as in hello, who the hell are you? Does that bother you, or just is one the same thing?
Oh, it doesn't. I quite like not having face fame and just having name fame. It's always nice to be able to live anonymously, and also the core of the people who know my work, with the exception of TEDx Sydney, are, getting older. So a lot of the meh is probably coming from people, who are the next generation. But no, often I'll have, like we just sold the vacant block of land next to the shack that came with the shack to a guy from the eastern suburbs, and I happened to just bump into him the night before last. He was at Gelberson's on Lamrock Avenue, and I was with Roman and his girlfriend Katie, and we had a chat. And the first thing he said to me was, and this is after we've exchanged contracts, settled, whatever. And he's from the eastern suburbs. Says, "So you're that Remo? I just figured out who you are. Right. So you're that guy."
So that's that. You've cracked the code. Actually, that's nice. You've got a sort of fame on your own terms. I mean, fame, what a stupid word, but you've got a profile, but it doesn't mess with you at all. It's an asset rather than a.
I'm interested in profile, not for its own sake, only for as a result of doing good work. For me, it's all about the work.
It's just been a delight talking to you, mate. I'm so glad that you came on.
I got a lot out there, didn't I?
Yeah, you did. I love it. And none about bloody Bondi. We did it. Now, tell me that there's a sixth question.
Yeah.
Which I'm really enjoying. But we're going to get round to all these people eventually. But we got so many people coming on and wanting to come on. But we have a tradition where we ask all our guests who they would like to hear on Five of My Life next. And then we make a note. And
okay.
So who would you like to hear on Five of My Life next?
I think Dare would be good.
Yeah?
Dare Jennings.
Okay. Tell me why.
He's just got a very interesting, he's from Griffith, country boy, sort of fell into being a kind of global fashion entrepreneur. He started as silk screening, T-shirts for rock and roll tours. And we met very soon after. The penny dropped for him that he would make more money out of and get more satisfaction out of creating a brand of his own designs, which was Mambo, than producing tens of thousands of Hard Rock Cafe T-shirts and selling them to the promoter, so...
Well, I look forward to hearing his choices. Remo, thank you so much for sharing your five on Five of My Life.
Thanks, Nige.
The Five of My Life was presented by me, Nigel Marsh. Producer, Alex Mitchell. Sound production and theme music by Darcy Thompson and Matt Nicholish.